This one's a 1925 Ajax, quite an eclectic gathering of vehicles. It was mainly assembled by a chap who's passed away, who was into collecting Packards. And the one that we saw at the beginning, 1927 Falcon 10 sedan. And of course some of the older vehicles survived on the roads of New Zealand until relatively late. This one's a 1934 DeSoto. This is a 1950 Studebaker, another classic design of the era, and instantly recognisable. Next door to that one's a 1957 Studebaker President. I suppose the only place really in the world that you can still see these types of vehicles in use is in Cuba. But the situation there looks ready to change, and I suppose one day all this type of vehicle will only be found in museums like this. No doubt about the make there, Packard writ large. This is a 1957 Packard Clipper. Something a little bit more unusual, a Hudson Terraplane. This one dates from 1937. A 1963 Studebaker. That's a new one on me. I'm sure all the aficionados of cars will be well familiar, but I think it's the first time I've seen one of these. So some interesting vehicles to start our look around the museum. It's been specially opened up for a group today, and we were just lucky that we phoned up to see if there's any chance of looking in on the collection, which would normally have been closed, and we were managed to sneak in with the group, or just in front of the group actually, which is pretty good for us. I think the conversion to pick up here is the unusual bit on this. Baby Austin's very popular.
This is the hand-drive the Queen got when she was here in '53.
Back to the Yankee jobs and the 1955 Packard Clipper. A Sept Thruxton motorbike. I'm sure this one would go down well in England. This is an aerial red hunter, 1955 vintage. Well, there's a few Brit classics around the museum, and the F4 taxi, certainly a classic from England. We hear that the engine had been rebuilt to stop it rattling, but it didn't make much difference, it still rattled. Nearest the camera, an Austin Princess limousine, an A135. These were built between 1947 to 1956. I think you'd have to be in the upper echelons of society to be driven around in this. I can't see anybody actually driving it themselves if they were rich enough to own something like that. And another car that would have served the upper echelons of society, a 1956 Armstrong Siddeley Sapphire 346. Few car museums would be complete without a Model T Ford. Certainly a design classic of its time in which Henry Ford perfected factory manufacture. And back to upper crust vehicles, and a Rover. And I grew up in Eastbourne in Sussex in the 1950s and 60s. This is typical of the cars you could find in the posh end of town. Really solid job, 3.5 litre. The enormous bulk of this Hudson just epitomises the American styling of the 1940s and 50s. An essay in 1940s Americana cars. This one looks as though it's still undergoing restoration. Back in the late 1940s, if you're cruising the strip, I'm sure you'd have cut quite an impression with the young ladies if you were driving along in this Packard convertible. And around the museum, various other transport memorabilia. This is the Land Rover that the Queen Elizabeth used on her 1953 visit to New Zealand. This is a World War I Albion, war subsidy lorry converted into a charabanc. Albion. I can't tell you much about this one, not a make I'm particularly familiar with, a Rugby, but it's a pretty impressive machine. So we've got a Dennis, ubiquitous fire engine, and next to that one based on a Carrier chassis. Space a little bit at a premium here. Do our best to show you what we can. 1930s Chevrolet. I don't think the crew want to be going up too much of a climb on that ladder. The old Dennis. I think that's been in preservation for many a long year. A late 1930s Packard. This one seems in pretty well restored condition. Seen a little bit of use, but very good condition overall. And if we were to spin round, we've got some traction engines. We've got a Garrett named Annabelle. In the manner of the time, most of them are named. A 1905 McLaren. This one looks as though it's been in preservation in some form or another for many a long year. Some interesting vehicles tucked away in the corners. Not everything that we can really get at to do it justice. We've got an Albion, an early Albion Pantechnicon. Certainly a beast and a half of its time. I was just thinking to myself this would go down a blast at the Bridgestone or Lathalmond Open Days in Scotland. The chain-driven rear axle. This Packard in the foreground, we'll take a look at it in more detail. It's come from Hawaii. Behind that, the unmistakable John Fowler and Co of Leeds, one of the main manufacturers of traction engines at the time, and then another Burrell, again a well-known name for steam aficionados. Hawaiian horseless carriage number 35. From the Aloha state in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. This Packard dates back all the way to 1919. This one's a Ford Prefect. This Cadillac ran for Newman's for their tours. That's a shame it's in a fairly inaccessible position for photography. I'd certainly make this one in one of the prides of place. Gorgeous piece of New Zealand history. A 14 horsepower Wolseley. A pair of Singer Hunters. A Rover. A Morris Kimberley, another new one on me, and unfortunately another one not that well placed for photography. Give me the best impression that we can. I'm sure that's an absolute treasure for Morris collectors. I guess it must have been made for the Australian and New Zealand market. A Riley, and in the front an Austin Princess. And this one's an Austin pickup. Bulbous Vauxhall over in the back, and an SU in front of it. Hulk of a Hudson Commodore. Plenty of restoration projects in the museum here. You can have any colour you want as long as it's black on this clipper. Nice two-tone Daimler. Colours look almost metallic. Wonder if it really was that colour when it was new. Perhaps it was. I wasn't rich enough to own such beauties as that. Slightly more prosaic, an old Morris 12. General Motors truck, still quite a lot of those in service around the world. A Hillman Imp, I learnt to drive in one of those. I think I took my test in one. A couple of old international buses, unfortunately absolutely tucked away at the back. It's about as good as it gets, I'm afraid. This Fiat certainly looks as though it's done its time in Asia somewhere. Morris Minor, early one with the split windscreen. And the rear of the international buses, certainly the one nearest from Newman's. It's a shame you can't see them a little bit better. Wartime Chevrolet. Not sure if it's a Canadian one or an American one. I suppose we could always hope for a Commonwealth theme and say it came from Canada. And this one's a little Daimler Ferret Scout car. And this one's a Wolseley 680, and this is probably more famous in its time when they were used as police patrol cars. Many equipped with rather rudimentary radio apparatus. It's yet another classic icon of an earlier era.
Leave about this high.
Well, returning to civilian life with a little Morris 8. Beautiful Austin, made to imitate American cars of the era. and that's next to a more prosaic form of Volkswagen Beetle. Land Rover in the background. Alice Chalmers at the back, Caterpillar at the front. You wouldn't want to argue with somebody driving one of these beasts. Lots of the earth-moving equipment in New Zealand used in the forestry industry. Nice Bedford, waiting repatriation to the UK perhaps at an auction, or perhaps one day it'll be done up in New Zealand, who knows. Pretty good condition, most of the bits are there. Just I think the missing bits and the wings are in the back, so I'd say it's probably complete. Just a bit of tin worm there to be sorted out. Fair bit of restoration work to be done on this Bedford. There's a duo of them side by side. Nice Thornycroft restoration prospect for somebody perhaps, and surrounded by earth-moving plant now. See if we can have a good old round up of the stuff that's outside. We've got a large group hot on our tails. Just see if we can keep one step ahead of them, keep the noise down. Old Fiat. I suppose all the experts in plant will be well up to speed with the gear we're looking at, but some of it is a challenge to my knowledge. This one's a Bristol Taurus. Is it the Bristol that we're familiar with, or another mark of Bristol? A diminutive Caterpillar 2-tonner next to Fiat tractor. Another Second World War Chevrolet. These were built in very large numbers and scattered all over the Far East. And as I say, quite a few still in service. They form the basis for most of the bus services in Burma, still running. Black House, I think the tractor in the, the steamroller in the front. Right, Jap stuff.
Little excavator, is that, whose is that?
Yeah, that's it. Everything here's ours.
Because that, I used to drive one of those when I was working on site in Wales.
Oh, yeah.
That was me, I used to drive one of those every day.
Yeah,
I don't know if I
well,
could
that's
do it
good for
now.
doing the small stuff. Back against those round knobs on the side of the track there.
Yeah.
Someone stole the caps off it, so I've got to find him. So I've got this Maori guy that works down at Virgin. I'm going to get him on this hill up there.
unfortunately, all too soon, we've come to the end of our transport presentation.